Hello, my name is Alfred Fenech. I'm the host producer of DJARJU Malti television program. First of all, I want to thank the director of the program, A Scattering of Seeds, Lawrence Green, for the biography of the late Giordmaine, world Maltese magician. I also want to thank the producers, RAYMONT and LINDALEE TRACEY, for giving me permission to air this program. Another thank goes to Chevalier Richard CUMBO, KOSJ, for his help to make this possible.
They came on dreams, the immigrants, to build a nation.
The laws of Canada, and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. Hello? Is that Johnny Giordmaine? It's me. Toronto 7, Ontario?
It's me.
Canada's greatest magician?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yes. Well, this call is from Calgary, Alberta.
It is right.
Just listen to this. We've all been thinking of the world's greatest and best loved little magician artist.
Hello?
Yes?
You know, I'm afraid. I don't know.
Yeah, not just now. I'm busy just now. Can I call you a little later? Goodbye.
Oh, Johnny.
It's September 8th, and Toronto is celebrating Malta Day by flying the true colors of the tiny George Cross Island over City Hall. Tall of stature among the Mediterranean immigrants is Johnny Giordmaine, Canada's Maltese ambassador of magic. At the drop of a hat, a top hat, Johnny fires up the crowd with some old-fashioned sleight of hand he learned when he was small. I mean, young.
My father was a member of the Knights of Malta, and he was one of the leaders of the Maltese community in Toronto. As far back as I can remember, he told me stories of Malta. And these were wonderful stories. There were stories about falcons, stories of prehistoric temples, Carthaginians and Phoenicians. They were stories of St. Paul being shipwrecked on Malta. All of the history of Malta somehow left me with a feeling that it was a place of mystery, that it was a kind of mythic and heroic place. And it was kind of a magical place. Things were not at all as spectacular in Malta at the turn of the century as they were in the stories of earlier times. In fact, my father was one of 12 children, and of those 12 children, only 3, my father, the eldest, Joe and Anthony, lived to adulthood. Malta is a very small country, and the opportunities available for young people are very limited. He went to a technical school in Malta and studied electrical engineering. And as a result of that technical training, he was able to get a job in the British Admiralty dockyards in Malta as a telephone technician. And it was this experience during his stay at the dockyards that I think the dream of emigrating from Malta came.
There's a man, a very rich man, his name was Papafi, and he died and he left some money for people that haven't got enough money to emigrate. And I used that money, I have to pass an examination to get it. And I came here through that, with that Papafi's fund, they call it, you know. It took me a whole month. I arrived here on 17th of October, 1919. Without class, the junior, and here now net, school says Mula. In fact, we had that's when we saw land, Lewis Arbom, and let's go back. He said, that's not go back, let's go back.
when he arrived in Toronto, he had nothing. But within 2 days, he had found a job. And it was a dangerous job. It was a hot and tough job. And it was at Swift's, a huge packing plant that was in the area near the junction.
Swift and Company was the largest meat packing company in the world at that time. And in them days, when someone came out from Malta, they settled in the Maltese community, which was Runnymede and Dundas. And there was a Maltese grocer and vegetable store on Dundas near Gilmore. And it became a meeting place for them, and they could do their shopping in their own language. A lot of them were gladly accepted by Swift because they became known as fairly reliable and good-working people. I was fortunate. The department I was in, there was about 18 people, and probably 10 of them were Maltese. And we talked Maltese all day.
At Swift's, he was an assistant electrician, and he, in fact, was to spend 10 years there. And when his brother Joe arrived 6 years later, he found him a job at Swift's right away.
When the plants were in operation, the stockyards was also in operation across the road. And most of the animals were taken over to the plant by crossing them across St. Clair. I've had my shares of slips and falls. Once I was dumping fat into a tank. The tank was about 2 stories high, and in them days, well, even today, if you fall into a tank and nobody's there to see you, they'd never know you were in there.
He was working on a live circuit and had a very serious injury in an electrical accident. And this made him step back a little bit and ask, is this what he really wanted to be doing? Is this what he had emigrated about a quarter of the way around the world to do? Recall that this was the beginning of the Depression. He had a steady job, and at this point, he decided to gamble by leaving Swift's and going to a completely new job. And it was a job that would allow him to follow up on a dream that had started in Malta. My father's interest in magic started when he was 9 years old in Malta. He watched a performance by a very imposing Maltese magician with white hair, tall. His name was Sapiano. My father was so impressed by the performance of this very imposing magician that he took up magic immediately as a hobby.
You know, I am often asked how I started in magic. Well, I started many, many years ago when I was small, when I was young. And I used to play in an orchestra. I played the flute and the piano. And I always liked magic. I read quite a bit about it when I was young. And I told the leader that I do tricks. He said, why don't you do something during the intermission? So that's a good idea. I said, I have some in my pocket with me here. He said, go ahead. So I did the tricks, and the show was over, and went home and said, John, Dr. White was his name. He said, John, he said, I have something to tell you. I said, I hope you don't mind me. I said, no. He said, you're better at magic than you are at music. And that started me. And I saw an ad that said, earn $80 or $100 or $200 a week and be a magician, and it's very easy, and take a correspondence course in Chicago. I believe it's the hardest thing to learn by correspondence, because somebody has to show you how to do those tricks. I used to go to a show and stay for 2 or 3 hours, get half a deck of cards in each hand, and manipulate them and cut them in half and mix them and shuffle them while I'm looking at the pictures.
a landlady of my father's in the West End, who herself was an immigrant to Canada from Ireland, introduced my father to her niece, Anna Kane. Now, she was clearly not Maltese, but she had a lot in common with my father. She was one of a large number of children as well, and before long they decided to get married. But it almost didn't happen because on the day of the wedding in October 1930, my father had to come to the wedding in Pittsburgh from Toronto. He decided to drive through Buffalo. And sure enough, he was caught in a huge snowstorm, freak snowstorm, and arrived 7 hours late for the wedding. Fortunately, my mother waited. Well, when my father took up his magic hobby, he first experimented with magic that made the claim to some supernatural powers that the magician held. This might be magic in which you heard the voices of your deceased relatives. Usually you heard them in a characteristic Maltese accent. He was visiting a hospital doing magic, and a crippled lady in the hospital asked him very seriously to wave his wand over her legs. And he immediately backed off. But she insisted, and finally he did it. But he felt very bad about it, and this affected him very seriously. So from that time on, he was very careful to avoid any situation where there was anything that one could even imagine was supernatural about his magic. From then on, his magic was fun.
This is my magic den. This is where I spend a lot of my time among magicians. Just with me, this is the best place in the world because I just enjoy it down here so much. I have so many tricks I have been collecting for nearly 40 years. Some of these are made in England, some are made in Europe, other places, and some I make myself.
Here's a box of magic tricks that he produced. When I say he produced, I like to take a little credit too, because my mother and I were part of the production line in our home basement that actually produced these tricks. At the beginning of the 30s, he was an accomplished performer, and it was at that point he was invited to open a magic shop on Eaton's 5th floor at Yonge and Queen. And this was a position that he would have for almost the next 30 years. Eaton's was a very special company at that time, and my father got to know the top management of Eaton's. He got to know Lady Eaton, and he came to perform at Lady Eaton's residence every Christmas. And whenever the family held house parties, he was the person invited to perform. So in fact, he became a kind of court jester for the Eatons.
Here's something here. There's a little magic ball. This ball, I'll just say 1, 2, 3, throw it up in the air. Like, see? What did I tell you? Everything is up here. I like doing this myself. I amuse myself. Oh, here it comes over like you said. This side, see? There's a little ball in here.
In 1933, a television experimentalist who had evolved a working television system came to Toronto, and in fact, Eaton's was chosen as a place to demonstrate. There was a variety show put on, and it was emceed by Foster Hewitt, and my father did magic.
Here are a few scrapbooks and photographs, and there is one with the governor of Malta. He gave it to me when I performed for him over there. He's a lovely man. I was so glad to meet him. There is one here from the front page of the Maltese magazine. I was very proud of that in 1940. There is another one. Oh, this is from Prime Minister Mackenzie King. He enjoyed the show very, very much. The New York World's Fair. the children of the art gallery. Oh yes, I was on Ed Sullivan, and he sent me a very nice photograph of himself.
Before some of his shows, for example, on television with Ed Sullivan, he told me that he was nervous. But when you watched him do the show, there's no way you could imagine that he was being nervous. And in fact, his whole style of doing magic on television made him a great success in that medium.
I'll have all your stamps in here. He said, could you? I said, yes, watch. Stamps over here. And he was so surprised. And then, you know, thank you very much indeed. And the mother came, she said, John, you...
Children loved my father. It was his peculiar way of speaking. It was the fact that he was so short that they didn't have to look up to him. He and they were on the same level, so that while he was an adult, he was one of them in a very special way. He and my mother were both from families of 10 to 12 children, and I know that they wanted to have a large family as well. And I think it was a big disappointment to them that they just had one child. But my father, I know, when he considered the tens of thousands of children that he entertained in his lifetime, must surely have thought that those children that he made happy were the extended family that he and my mother, in fact, wanted to have. Dad tried to get me involved in magic in a lot of different ways. He got me a job as an assistant at Eaton's, helping him at the magic counter. At about the same time, I got involved in helping him on stage. My job was to be a stooge. I was wearing a tie in the audience and was called up on stage to help him, and my tie got cut up in the act and mysteriously got put together. He began the act by talking to me and said, "You've never seen me before, have you?" I said, "No, Dad." So I wasn't very much help to him for quite a while.
Yeah, I'll be right back.
By saying the magical words, Giordmaine, the rings as the original Chinese source.
Yeah. See, today it's wonderful. I'm seeing people that I haven't seen for years and years, and it brings back a lot of memories.
Mr. Giordmaine, I was rather surprised. In meeting you today, I have seen your work on countless television shows and also down at Eton. I've always thought of you, for some reason or other, as a French-Canadian. I do not know why. And now meeting you, I find out that actually you are a Maltese. Is that what they call people from Malta?
Maltese from Malta. Quite a number of people take me for a French-Canadian on account of the way I talk. But I come from Malta.
My father was certainly in the Canadian mainstream, and yet at the same time he never lost his Maltese roots and his Maltese identity. Well, the Junction for me was always a very special place. In many ways, it was a foreign place for me because around the early 30s, just shortly after I was born, he had in mind what school I would attend. And in fact, he chose at that time to move away from the Junction area where he had all the close Maltese connections. Although he didn't have a great deal of interest in things like hockey and lacrosse, he saw to it that I had the opportunity to take a full part in that. In our house, there was no Maltese spoken, primarily because my mother was American, not Maltese. So I heard Maltese being spoken on the phone, but I didn't learn it. So I really became a Canadian. I was 7 years old at the time that the bombing of Malta began.
I remember my dad listening to the news every night at 6:30. Hitler had vowed to remove Malta from the face of the earth.
There was a lot of effort in putting together what we'd now call care packages for the Maltese. But at the same time, I saw my father's involvement. He was heavily involved in Malta war relief. My father was a member of the Toronto Maskers, which was a group of people who worked at Eaton's, but many evenings this group would get on a bus and go to an army camp or an Air Force camp near Toronto and perform. And quite often this would keep them out until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. During the late 40s, there were a number of Maltese emigrating to Toronto. And some of these people he actually brought into our home and made their arrival in Toronto a lot smoother than his had been.
The Maltese that were established would help the new immigrants that came over by giving them room and board. In a lot of cases, they wouldn't charge them until they found employment and had some income.
He had a great sense of finding opportunities to promote people's careers, including my own. He had the idea that he would like to make me a professional magician, and in fact it would have been a great start, considering that all he had learned and all he had contributed to magic. But at the time, I had other interests. I became interested in science, and he soon got quite excited about this, because his view of science and magic were very, very similar. He was always fascinated by science, whether it was the regularity of waves in the water, the symmetry of snowflakes, the miracle of having children, the turning of the color of the leaves in the autumn, the colors of the rainbow. He took a really simple and deep joy in these kinds of things.
You know, our son, he's doing magic of his own now. You know, he studied chemistry and physics, and he's a doctor of philosophy now, and he's doing tricks with lasers and masers. And that's magic to him. I can't understand. That's above me, the magic he's doing. That's real magic in another line, science.
For him, scientific things had a magical quality to them. And so I think in his eyes, I really did follow in his footsteps.